The interstellar collective prided itself on enlightenment. 47 species, thousands of worlds, all united under the banner of peaceful coexistence and academic excellence. Their universities stood as monuments to this achievement, gleaming spires of crystal and light, where the galaxy's brightest minds gathered to study, research, and occasionally argue about theoretical physics over fermented beverages. The Helixian Academy, perched on a moon orbiting a binary star system, represented the absolute pinnacle of this educational utopia. Only the best, the brightest, the most genetically fortunate were admitted, which made it all the more baffling that they'd accepted someone from Earth. Earth, a planet so ridiculously hostile that the initial survey team had recommended immediate quarantine and a strong suggestion that whatever evolved there should probably stay there. Gravity 20% higher than galactic standard. Atmosphere composed of a gas most species considered mildly toxic. Weather patterns that included spinning columns of death, frozen water falling from the sky, and occasional electrical storms that could power a small city. And the life? Oh, the life was the best part. Everything on Earth had apparently decided that the best survival strategy was to become absolutely terrifying. The collective xenobiologists had spent 3 months just cataloging the various ways Earth's organisms could kill you. Venoms, diseases, teeth, claws, microscopic assassins, plants that could burn your skin off, ocean creatures that could stop your heart with a touch, land predators that hunted in packs with coordinated tactics. Even the herbivores were dangerous. Several species could kick hard enough to shatter bones or gore you with horns. The final report had been 17,000 pages long, and concluded with the phrase, Deathworld, Category 9, approach with extreme caution. But Earth's dominant species had developed radio, then nuclear fission, then primitive faster-than-light communication attempts that the collective had picked up. Protocol dictated contact. Protocol also dictated extreme vetting of any individuals allowed into collective space. So, when the human delegation arrived with their proposal to send a student to Helixian Academy as a gesture of goodwill, the collective had spent 6 months running background checks. The candidate they selected seemed perfect, academically gifted, physically unimposing by human standards, psychologically stable, no history of violence. Her entrance exams had been spectacular. Her references glowed. She even had a pleasant smile. The collective congratulated itself on its thoroughness and approved her application. This would later be recognized as a catastrophic failure of imagination. The human's name was rendered in collective standard as Kes Morvan, though her actual name contained sounds that made several species uncomfortable. She arrived at Helixian Academy on a standard transport, carrying 2 bags and an expression of barely contained excitement. At 5 feet 6 inches, she was shorter than most species' average height. Her muscle mass appeared adequate, but not excessive. Brown hair, brown eyes, skin the color of what Earth designated light tan. Unremarkable by any standard, the Academy's central plaza sprawled before her like something from a dream. Crystalline pathways wound between buildings that seemed to grow organically from the ground itself. Students from dozens of species moved between classes, the tall, graceful Velrosians with their iridescent skin, the 4-armed Korath who gestured constantly while speaking, the gelatinous Fluxy who oozed along in environmentally controlled spheres, the Dravine with their scales and crests. Flying species soared overhead. Aquatic species swam through transparent tubes that connected buildings. Kes stood there with her bags and smiled like an idiot, thinking, I made it. She had exactly 48 hours before learning her mistake. The trouble started in xenochemistry, her 3rd class of the 2nd day. Professor Tal, a distinguished Velrosian with credentials longer than Kes was tall, was explaining the basics of periodic tables across different planetary conditions. Kes had taken her seat in the back, still trying to absorb the fact that she was actually here, learning alongside aliens, living the dream every kid who'd ever looked up at the stars had imagined. And of course, Professor Tal was saying, certain elements remain universally constant regardless of planetary formation conditions. Hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen. These form the basis of all known biological systems. Kez raised her hand. What about silicon-based life? The professor paused. Several students turned to look at her. Silicon-based life is theoretical, Thal said, with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to a child. We have no confirmed examples. Right. But the theoretical models suggest it could exist in high-temperature environments where carbon bonds would break down. Theoretical models, created by primitive species who lack the mathematical foundation to understand their own limitations. A voice cut in from 3 rows ahead. The speaker was a Korath named Vex Tharoon, son of some important diplomat or industrialist or both. He turned in his seat to look at Kez directly. Perhaps on your world, guessing passes for science. Light laughter rippled through the classroom. Professor Tal made no move to intervene. Kez felt her face heat up, a human stress response that would have meant nothing to most species present. I wasn't guessing. I was referencing a paper published in the Collective Scientific Journal last year, which was written by researchers attempting to justify continued funding for useless speculation. Vex interrupted. Tell me, human, on your world, do you still believe in supernatural entities? Gods and spirits? More laughter. Kez's jaw tightened. Some people do. It's called religion. Many species have many primitive species. Vex corrected. Those of us who've moved past such childish needs prefer to focus on actual knowledge. Professor Tal finally interceded, but only to say, let's return to the lesson. Miss Morvan, in the future, please save questions until you've completed the assigned reading. You may find your concerns already addressed. Kez had completed the assigned reading. She'd completed it twice. She said nothing and stared at her desk for the rest of class. It got worse. Someone hacked her student account and changed all her class selections to remedial courses designed for species with limited cognitive capacity. It took 3 days to sort out, during which she missed lectures and fell behind. Her belongings started disappearing from her dormitory, nothing valuable, just annoying things. A hairbrush, shoes, her data tablet's charging cable, food from her small cooling unit. In physical conditioning, a required course, because apparently the collective believed in holistic education, she was partnered with a Dravine named Sora Kellix, who made very clear her disgust at having to work with Deathworld scum. Never mind that Kez was following every safety protocol, using equipment 5 settings below her actual capability, and generally trying to be the least threatening presence possible. You don't belong here, Sora hissed during a stretching routine. Everyone knows the only reason you were accepted was politics. Your species probably threatened violence if you weren't admitted. Kez, who was folded nearly in half human flexibility, was apparently unnerving to species with different joint structures. Looked up. That's not how it happened. No? Then explain how someone from an uncontacted world suddenly has a seat at the most prestigious academy in the collective. We developed radio. We reached out. We asked to be part of, you demanded special treatment. Sora cut her off. Just like you're doing now, taking up space that should go to someone civilized. Kez wanted to argue but recognized the futility. She finished her stretching in silence, hyper-aware of the stares from other students. The whispers. The way people moved away when she entered a room. She told herself it would get better. That she just needed to prove herself. That academic excellence would overcome prejudice. She was wrong. Vex Tharoon made it his personal mission to ensure Kez understood her place. He was sophisticated about it, never anything that could be proven or reported. A comment here, a strategic question there. Always when professors were distracted or in spaces without monitoring. I hear Deathworlders eat deceased organisms, he remarked one day in the cafeteria, voice loud enough to carry. Actual rotting flesh. Like scavengers. Kez, holding a tray with what passed for food, felt dozens of eyes turn toward her. It's called meat. And we cook it, which kills bacteria, and oh, it kills bacteria in your world's filthy conditions. How reassuring. Vex's friends laughed. Tell me, do you also consume plant matter that's been allowed to ferment? I've heard humans drink poison for recreation. Alcohol exists in many species cultures, refined alcohol, carefully synthesized. not fermented agricultural waste. He made a show of moving his tray away from hers. I'd rather not risk contamination. Kez left without eating. The isolation was comprehensive. Study groups formed without her. Group projects somehow always had already filled all positions by the time she inquired. Her attempts at friendly conversation were met with polite dismissal at best, outright hostility at worst. Her messages home became increasingly strained. What could she say? That humanity's grand entrance into galactic society was being undermined by the fact that aliens thought she was dirty, primitive, and fundamentally inferior. That every day was an exercise in swallowing rage and pretending everything was fine. She stopped messaging home altogether. 3 months in, Kez had developed a routine. Attend classes, take notes, return to her dormitory. Speak only when directly questioned. Make no unnecessary eye contact. Exist as quietly as possible in spaces that clearly didn't want her. She'd lost weight, human food requirements were specific, and the Academy's attempts at accommodation were half-hearted at best. She was tired constantly, stress eating away at her sleep schedule. But she was surviving. That had to count for something. Then came the symposium. The Helixian Academy's annual cultural symposium was the social event of the year. Students presented research, performed traditional arts, demonstrated cultural practices. It was part academic conference, part celebration, part networking opportunity. Attendance was mandatory. Participation was encouraged. Kez had been working on a presentation about Earth's biodiversity for weeks. She'd carefully curated it to be informative without being threatening, interesting without being controversial. Pictures of landscapes, explanations of ecosystems, basic evolutionary biology. Nothing about predation, nothing about humanity's place in Earth's food chain. Just pretty pictures and dry facts. She should have known better. The presentations took place in the Academy's Grand Auditorium, a space that could hold 3,000 beings comfortably. Kez's time slot was in the middle of the afternoon, following a Velrosian dance performance and preceding a Korath poetry recitation. She stepped onto the stage with her data chip and her carefully prepared notes. The technical difficulties started immediately. Her presentation wouldn't load. The backup wouldn't load. The emergency backup she'd stored on a separate system also, somehow, wouldn't load. 10 minutes of fumbling with equipment while the audience murmured and whispered. Finally, a technician managed to get something working. Except it wasn't her presentation. Instead, the massive display screen behind her filled with images she'd never seen. Earth, yes, but not the Earth she'd carefully curated. These were pictures of natural disasters. Hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, animals tearing into prey, sharks feeding, lions bringing down herbivores, wolves with blood on their muzzles. And then, horrifyingly, images of human history, wars, violence, weapons, carnage. The final image was a picture of Kez herself, badly photomanipulated to add blood and fangs, with text overlay reading, Deathworld Predator. Why is it here? The auditorium erupted in chaos. Gasps, shouts. Several species bolted for exits. Kez stood frozen on stage, staring at the screen, her brain refusing to process what was happening. Then she heard the laughter. Not nervous laughter, not shocked laughter. Genuine, cruel amusement. She turned and saw Vex the Rune in the front row, surrounded by his friends, laughing hard enough that his forearms clutched his torso. Tears streamed down his face. Other students joined in. The mockery spread like wildfire. Something in Kez's chest cracked. She'd spent 3 months being quiet, being careful, swallowing every insult, accepting every indignity, trying so desperately to prove she belonged. And this was the result. Public humiliation, mockery, the complete destruction of her credibility, her dignity, her presence here reduced to a joke. The technicians cut the display. A professor rushed onto stage, saying something about investigations and apologies and technical malfunctions. Kez barely heard it. The roaring in her ears drowned out everything else. She walked off stage, past the worried professor, past the still laughing students, out of the auditorium, down the crystalline pathways, back to her dormitory. where she sat on her bed and stared at the wall, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. They'd made a mistake. All of them. They'd looked at her academic records, and her psych evaluations, and her pleasant smile, and decided she was safe. Harmless. They'd forgotten, or never truly understood, what it meant to evolve on Earth. Earth, where the atmosphere had killed 90% of early life when oxygen became prevalent, where mass extinctions happened regularly, where everything that survived did so because it was tougher, meaner, more adaptable than the things that died, where humanity's ancestors had climbed down from trees and decided that running prey to death was a viable hunting strategy, where endurance and tool use and pack coordination created an apex predator that spread across an entire hostile planet. They'd read Category 9 Deathworld and thought it was an exaggeration, a clerical error. Because Kez was small and polite and smiled a lot, they'd forgotten that on Earth, many of the most dangerous creatures looked harmless right up until they killed you. Kez sat in her dormitory for 2 hours. She didn't cry. Crying was a human stress response, a social signal, an appeal for support. She had no support here. Crying was useless. Instead, she pulled up her academy account and accessed the student directory. Found Vex Tharoon's schedule. Found his friends' schedules. Cross-referenced for patterns. Identified locations, time windows, opportunities. Then she went to her closet and pulled out the box she'd brought from Earth, the one she'd shoved to the back, and tried to forget about. Inside were items from home, a few books, some photos, and, because she'd been told to bring items for physical recreation, her old training gear. Kez had started martial arts at age 7, boxing at 10, Krav Maga at 14. Not because she was violent, not because she'd ever planned to hurt anyone, but because Earth was dangerous, and humanity had long ago learned that prepared humans survived longer than unprepared ones. Her instructors had been good. Really good. The kind of good that came from actual combat experience, not sport. Sparring. She pulled out the hand wraps and stared at them. The collective thought violence was primitive, uncivilized. They'd evolved past such base instincts, they claimed. They settled disputes with dialogue and mediation and careful legal frameworks. That worked when everyone agreed to the framework. When everyone operated under the same rules. When power was balanced enough that no one could simply take what they wanted. Vex had broken that framework. He decided the rules didn't apply. That he could torment someone weaker with impunity because she was alien, other, lesser. He'd made a category error. He'd assumed won't fight and can't fight were the same thing. Kez wrapped her hands slowly, methodically, each loop of cloth a declaration. She wasn't going to file a complaint, wasn't going to plead with administrators, wasn't going to write home for support. She was going to teach these enlightened, civilized species a lesson about Deathworld evolution. Sometimes, the prey evolves defense mechanisms. Camouflage, speed, armor. And sometimes it evolves into something that's not prey anymore. Vex Tharoon's schedule was predictable. Every evening, he went to the Academy's recreational facility, a massive complex with equipment for dozens of species' exercise needs. He favored the Korath section, where elevated platforms and climbing structures accommodated his species' preference for vertical movement. He always went at the same time, 2 hours after dinner, when the facility was busy but not crowded. Kez waited in a maintenance corridor, watching through a transparent section of wall. Watching him joke with friends. Watching him demonstrate strength on equipment designed for species with 4 arms and 30% more muscle mass than humans. Watching him exist in complete confidence that the universe would continue to accommodate him. She'd checked the Academy's regulations on physical altercations. They were exactly as she'd expected. Violence was absolutely forbidden except in cases of immediate self-defense. Punishment ranged from expulsion to legal prosecution under collective law. She didn't care. What were they going to do? Send her back to Earth? She'd failed her mission the moment Vex decided to target her. Humanity's grand entrance into galactic society had already been compromised. At least this way, she'd ensure they understood exactly what they were dealing with. Vex finished his routine and headed toward the changing facilities. His friends had left earlier. The Korath section was nearly empty now, just a few stragglers on far platforms. Kez checked the monitoring system she'd hacked earlier. The cameras in the changing area corridor were on a loop. She had approximately 4 minutes. She stepped out of the maintenance corridor. Vex saw her and smiled. Actually smiled. The Deathworlder. Come to work on your primitive physique? I must say, the effort seems. Kez's fist hit him in the solar plexus, or what passed for it in Korath anatomy. 4 months of holding back, of using equipment at fraction capacity, had made everyone forget what human muscle density meant. What Deathworld gravity did to bone structure. What a species that could run marathons for fun brought to combat. The hit folded Vex like paper. His second set of arms came up reflexively. Kez grabbed one, used it as leverage, and drove her knee into what she'd learned was the Korath equivalent of a liver. The sound Vex made wasn't even close to human. High-pitched, wheezing. Biological systems designed for peaceful academic pursuits, trying to process sudden violence. He went down. Kez followed him down. The next 15 seconds were education in Deathworld combat efficiency. Humans didn't have claws or fangs or venom. They had fists and elbows and knees, and a skeleton that could take tremendous punishment. They had nervous systems that dumped adrenaline and increased pain tolerance and narrowed focus to a single purpose. They had thousands of years of accumulated knowledge about hurting other humans, and those techniques translated remarkably well to alien physiology. Kez's elbow found Vex's head crest. The crest wasn't decorative, it contained sensory organs. Breaking it was agony. Vex screamed. She shifted her weight, trapped 2 of his arms, and drove her fist into his thorax. Once, twice, 3 times. Methodical. Controlled. Each impact calculated. Stop! Vex wheezed. Stop, please. How many times did I ask you to stop? Kez's voice was conversational. Almost friendly. How many times did I politely request you leave me alone? How many complaints did I file that went nowhere? She stood up. Vex scrambled backward, leaving a trail of blue blood Korath blood, copper-based, oxidizing in atmosphere. His crest hung at an angle it absolutely shouldn't. One eye was swelling shut. He raised his arms defensively. Kez kicked him in the ribs. The kick wasn't hard by human standards. She wasn't trying to kill him, just educate. But human leg strength evolved for bipedal locomotion on high-gravity worlds. The force transferred through her shin into Vex's rib cage made sounds like breaking pottery. You wanted to know about Deathworlders, Kez said. Here's a lesson. On Earth, everything is trying to kill you. The weather, the environment, the other life forms. We evolved to deal with that. We developed persistence, tool use, pack coordination, and when necessary, extreme violence. Vex made a sound between whimpering and choking. You thought primitive meant weak, Kez continued. You thought uncivilized meant harmless. You thought I wouldn't fight back because I was quiet. Let me clarify. I wasn't being quiet because I couldn't fight. I was being quiet because I was trying to fit into your civilized society, trying to prove humans belonged here. She crouched down to Vex's level, made eye contact. Let him see whatever expression was on her face. She had no idea what she looked like right now, and didn't care. You've proven that's impossible. So here's the new arrangement. You leave me alone. You tell your friends to leave me alone. You spread the word that the human is off limits. Because if you don't, she let the sentence hang, stood up, walked away. Behind her, Vex Tharun lay on the floor, trying to remember how breathing worked, wondering how something so small had hurt him so badly, and experiencing the first genuine fear of his privileged life. The response time was actually impressive. Security arrived within 6 minutes. Kez was in her dormitory, calmly washing blue blood off her hands. When they knocked, she'd known they'd come, had planned for it. Didn't resist when they placed restraints on her wrists, restraints designed for species much stronger than humans assumed to be, which made them loose and slightly comical. The questioning took place in a sterile room with multiple species present. A security chief, a medical representative, a legal advocate, a counselor. all of them deeply uncomfortable. Miss Morvan, the security chief began. He was Velrosian, with the three-eyed stare that species used to convey seriousness. Do you understand why you're here? I assaulted another student, Kez said. Vex Tharoon. Approximately 30 minutes ago. In the recreational facilities Korath section. Silence. They'd expected denial, apparently. Or excuses. Can you explain why you committed this assault? Kez spent the next 20 minutes explaining. All of it. The systematic harassment. The isolation. The sabotage. The complete failure of Academy administration to address any complaint she'd filed. The public humiliation at the symposium. She kept her voice level, factual, emotionless. Presented it like a research paper. When she finished, the legal advocate of Fluxy in their environmental sphere spoke. Their voice came through a translator, soft and bubbling. Why didn't you continue through proper channels? I did. 7. Formal complaints over 3 months. 0 responses. 0 investigations. 0 consequences for the students involved. More silence. Miss Morvan, you must understand that violence is absolutely forbidden except in self-defense. Yes. I read the regulations. Kez looked at each of them in turn. Here's a question. When systematic psychological abuse is ignored by authorities, when harassment is permitted to continue despite documented complaints, when a student is isolated and tormented daily with no institutional support, what's the proper channel? Because I tried every official avenue. They failed. That doesn't justify physical assault, the counselor interjected. They were a species Kez didn't recognize, crystalline, refracting light in strange patterns. We are a civilized society. We resolve conflicts through dialogue. Dialogue requires both parties to participate in good faith. Vex Tharoon had no interest in dialogue. He wanted a target. You gave him one by admitting me without any support structure, then ignoring every sign that I was being systematically abused. Kez leaned forward. The restraints clinked. Let me be clear. I'm not sorry. I'm not remorseful. Vex learned a valuable lesson about making assumptions based on appearance. The rest of the student body will learn that lesson by extension. And maybe the Academy administration will learn that ignoring complaints has consequences. The security chief's 3 eyes blinked in sequence. You'll be expelled. Potentially prosecuted under collective law. Fine, send me home. I'll tell humanity that the galaxy's greatest educational institution admitted their representative as a political gesture, then allowed her to be tormented for months because she was different. I'll explain that enlightened species are perfectly capable of prejudice and cruelty. They're just more polite about it. That'll do wonders for Earth's application to full collective membership. She sat back. Or, you, investigate what actually happened here. Review the footage from the symposium. Check who accessed my student accounts. Interview other students about the harassment. And recognize that I acted only after every legitimate avenue failed. The investigation took 4 days. During that time, Kez remained in her dormitory under what amounted to house arrest. She wasn't allowed to attend classes, wasn't allowed in common areas, food was delivered. She spent the time sleeping more than she had in months, her body finally releasing tension it had held since arrival. On the 5th day, they called her back. The conference room was more crowded this time. The security chief. Several administrators. The Academy's dean, an ancient being whose species Kez couldn't identify. And, notably, Vex Tharoon's parents, attending via holographic projection. The dean spoke first. Their voice was like wind through caves, translated into collective standard. Miss Morvan. We've completed our investigation. Kez waited. The evidence supports your account. We've identified systematic harassment spanning your entire enrollment. Multiple students were involved, though Vex Tharoon was the primary instigator. We've also discovered that your formal complaints were deliberately suppressed by a staff member who felt your presence was inappropriate. The dean paused. If they had expressions, Kez couldn't read them. We've also reviewed your species file more thoroughly. It appears there was a fundamental misunderstanding regarding Earth's threat classification. Category 9 Deathworld is not, as was assumed, a clerical error. Your planet is genuinely one of the most hostile environments in collective records. Your species evolved under conditions we would consider catastrophic. This context was not properly conveyed to staff or students. So everyone assumed I was harmless, Kez said. Yes, that assumption has been corrected. One of Vex's parents, the mother, Kez thought, based on coloration, spoke up. Our son is still in medical care. He has 3 fractured ribs, severe cranial damage, and significant psychological trauma. You could have killed him. Kez met the holographic projection's eyes. If I wanted to kill him, he'd be dead. I wanted him to understand that actions have consequences. Mission accomplished. The mother's face colored anger, Kez had learned. You're a savage. A violent primitive. Your son tormented another student for 3 months, Kez interrupted. Sabotaged her education, publicly humiliated her, organized systematic harassment, and you're upset that she finally defended herself. Maybe ask why he thought he could do all that with impunity. He's just a child. He's an adult by collective standards, old enough to attend university, old enough to be held responsible for his choices. Kez turned back to the dean. What's the verdict? The dean was silent for a long moment. Vex Tharoon and 6 other students are expelled for harassment, sabotage, and conduct violations. The staff member who suppressed your complaints has been terminated. You, Miss Morven, are. Another pause. Placed on academic probation. You'll attend mandatory counseling sessions. Any future violent incidents will result in immediate expulsion. But you're allowed to continue your studies. Kez blinked. You're not expelling me. No. We failed you, Miss Morven. We admitted you without adequate preparation, ignored clear warning signs, and allowed a hostile environment to develop. Expelling you would compound that failure. The dean shifted a gesture Kez couldn't interpret. However, understand this. The collective prides itself on peaceful coexistence. Violence cannot be normalized. What you did was understandable given the circumstances, but it cannot happen again. Understood, Kez said, because what else could she say? One more thing. The dean produced a datapad. We're implementing new protocols for Deathworld species. Support systems. Cultural liaisons. Stricter anti-harassment policies. You'll be consulted in developing these protocols. Your experience, while regrettable, has revealed significant gaps in our procedures. Vex's mother was still speaking, saying something about legal action and justice and the decline of civilized standards. The administrators were politely ignoring her. The meeting dissolved into procedural discussion. Kez sat there and felt nothing. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Just a strange emptiness where rage had been. Words spread faster than light-speed communication. By the time Kez returned to classes, everyone knew. The human had hospitalized Vex Tharoon. The human was dangerous. The human was stronger than she looked, faster than expected, and apparently willing to use violence when pushed far enough. The primitive classification had been a gross underestimation. The social dynamics inverted overnight. Students gave her space. Wide space. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Her lab partners were extremely polite. No one tried to sit with her at meals, but now it was because they were afraid, not contemptuous. Kez found she preferred contempt, at least that had been honest. 3 weeks after the incident, she was in the library, massive, multi-level, with sections adapted for various species when someone approached her table. A Velrosian girl, younger than most students. She hesitated several feet away. May I sit here? Kez looked up from her reading. Sure? The girl sat, arranging her 3 arms carefully. I'm Kira Vesh. Biochemistry track. I wanted to say, what you did. To Vex. Everyone's been talking about it. I'm aware. He deserved it. Kira spoke quickly, like she needed to get the words out. He was awful. Not just to you. Last year, he made a Fluxy student's life so miserable they left the academy. But because his family has influence, nothing happened. Everyone knew. No one did anything. Kez said nothing. And now he's gone. and everyone's terrified of you, but also. Kira hesitated. Also, some of us are glad that someone finally stood up to him, even if the method was extreme. I didn't do it for other people, Kez said. I did it because I was tired of being a target. I know. But still, it mattered. Kira stood. Anyway, thank you. And if you ever need a lab partner, I'm available. She left before Kez could respond. Over the following weeks, a strange thing happened. A few students started treating her normally, not friendly, exactly, but not terrified either. A Korath in her physics class asked to compare notes. A Dravine in the dormitory nodded greeting in the hallway. Small gestures. Careful. But something. Kez realized they were the ones who'd been quiet before. The ones who hadn't participated in the harassment but hadn't stopped it either. They saw her differently now. Not as a victim or a threat, but as someone who'd set a boundary and enforced it. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. 6 months after the incident, Kez gave another presentation at the Cultural Symposium. This time, there were no technical difficulties, no sabotage, just her, a stage, and an audience that was actually paying attention. Her topic: Evolutionary Pressures and Adaptive Strategies on High-Gravity Deathworlds. She explained Earth's history, the extinction events, the hostile conditions, the way life persisted through catastrophe after catastrophe, adapting, evolving, becoming more resilient. She talked about humanity's ancestors, persistence hunters who could track prey for days. She discussed tool use, social coordination, and the development of abstract thinking. People think Deathworld means violent, she said. That's a misunderstanding. Deathworld means challenging. It means the environment itself is hostile. Everything that survives does so through adaptation. For humanity, that meant becoming versatile. We're not the strongest species, not the fastest, not the most specialized, but we're persistent, creative, we solve problems. And when necessary. She paused, looking out at the audience. Saw fear in some faces, respect in others, curiosity in a few. We defend ourselves. Every species does. The methods just differ. The presentation ended to cautious applause. No one rushed to ask questions, but they didn't flee either. Progress, Kez thought. Maybe. In her dormitory that night, Kez finally sent a message home. Her first in months. She kept it brief. Still here. It's been complicated. I'm learning a lot about alien cultures, about the collective, about myself. The galaxy is beautiful and terrible and strange. Humanity should come prepared. Not just with science and diplomacy, but with understanding that civilized doesn't mean safe. That peaceful societies still have cruelty, just dressed in polite language. That sometimes you have to fight to be taken seriously. I'm okay. I'll be okay. Tell everyone I miss actual food and weather that tries to kill you honestly instead of pretending to be nice. More soon. Probably. She sent it and lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, alien stars shone through her window. Ships moved between orbital platforms. The galaxy continued its ancient dance. Somewhere in the medical wing, Vex Tharoon was probably having nightmares about the small human who'd shattered his assumptions along with his bones. Somewhere in the administrative offices, protocols were being rewritten to account for species that looked harmless but weren't. Somewhere in the galaxy, humanity was preparing its full application to join the collective, unaware that their representative had already taught everyone a valuable lesson. And in her quiet dormitory room, Kez closed her eyes and smiled. They'd called her primitive, a savage, a Deathworld beast pretending to be civilized. They hadn't been entirely wrong, but they'd also learned that sometimes, the beast knows when to be quiet and when to bite, when to follow rules and when to break them, when to be diplomatic and when to remind everyone that evolution shapes species in interesting ways. The galaxy wanted humans? Fine. They call.